We live in a world of instant connection. Our lives are increasingly lived online. Social media platforms have become our public squares. We use them to share our thoughts, our feelings, and our values. But what happens when our desire to be seen as good overshadows our desire to do good? This is the central question at the heart of virtue signaling. Virtue signaling is the act of publicly expressing moral values to enhance one's social standing. It's about crafting an image, not necessarily living up to it. In the digital age, virtue signaling has become both commonplace and increasingly difficult to dissect. It's a performance, with likes, shares, and comments serving as our applause. The rise of social media has undoubtedly amplified this phenomenon. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook provide the perfect stage for moral grandstanding. To understand the complexities of virtue signaling, we must first establish a clear definition. Virtue signaling, at its core, is the act of expressing moral values with the primary intention of enhancing one's social image. It's about appearing virtuous, often at the expense of actually being virtuous. This distinction between appearance and authenticity is crucial. Genuine activism is driven by a deep-seated commitment to a cause. It's about taking action to create meaningful change, regardless of whether anyone is watching or applauding. Virtue signaling, on the other hand, is primarily concerned with the perception of one's actions. The focus is on signaling moral righteousness, often with little regard for tangible outcomes. The motivations behind virtue signaling can be complex and multifaceted. In some cases, it may stem from a desire for social approval or a fear of being ostracized for holding unpopular views. In other cases, it may be a way of alleviating guilt or feeling like one is making a difference without having to expend significant effort. The digital age has provided new avenues for virtue signaling to flourish. Social media platforms, with their emphasis on public displays of support and outrage, create an environment where virtue signaling can thrive. The ease with which we can share our opinions and align ourselves with popular causes makes it tempting to engage in performative displays of morality. One of the most significant challenges posed by virtue signaling is the way it blurs the line between awareness and action. Raising awareness about important social issues is undoubtedly crucial. However, virtue signaling often stops at awareness without translating into tangible action or meaningful change. This is where the true danger of virtue signaling lies. It can create the illusion of progress, lulling individuals into a false sense of accomplishment. By simply liking a post or sharing a hashtag, people may feel like they have contributed to a cause without having to confront the complexities of the issue or make any personal sacrifices. Furthermore, virtue signaling can divert attention away from the root causes of social problems. Instead of engaging in meaningful dialogue or supporting organizations working to address these issues, virtue signaling often focuses on superficial displays of solidarity. This can lead to a shallow understanding of complex issues and hinder the development of effective solutions. The pervasiveness of virtue signaling can also create a climate of cynicism and distrust. When individuals or organizations are perceived as prioritizing appearances over genuine action, it can erode trust in their motives and undermine the legitimacy of their message. The digital age has ushered in an era of unprecedented connectivity. Social media platforms have become powerful tools for communication, mobilization, and advocacy. Yet this ease of engagement has also given rise to a phenomenon known as performative activism, a close cousin of virtue signaling. Performative activism centers on actions designed to demonstrate support for a cause, often with a greater emphasis on appearances than on substantive change. It thrives on the instant gratification of likes, shares, and retweets, creating an illusion of progress without the hard work of genuine engagement. The Ice Bucket Challenge, while successful in raising awareness and funds for ALS research, also exemplifies this phenomenon. It sparked a global movement, with millions participating by dousing themselves with ice water on camera. However, critics argued that for many, the act became more about joining a viral trend than understanding the complexities of the disease or contributing to long-term solutions. Similarly, Blackout Tuesday, a social media movement intended to show solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, drew both praise and criticism. While some saw it as a powerful display of unity, others criticized it for stifling meaningful conversations about racial injustice and promoting performative allyship over concrete action. The danger of performative activism lies in its potential to create a false sense of accomplishment. Clicking a button, sharing a post, or changing a profile picture may offer a momentary feeling of involvement, but these actions alone rarely translate into the systemic change required to address complex social issues. The digital landscape is littered with examples of campaigns and movements where the initial surge of online activism failed to translate into lasting, real-world impact. These instances highlight the crucial distinction between raising awareness and driving meaningful change. One such example is the Kony 2012 campaign, which went viral for its efforts to bring Ugandan warlord Joseph Kony to justice. The campaign's video garnered millions of views and sparked widespread outrage, yet it ultimately failed to achieve its stated goal of Kony's arrest. Critics argued that the campaign oversimplified a complex conflict and prioritized viral fame over sustainable solutions. Similarly, the #MeToo movement, while undeniably powerful in amplifying the voices of survivors of sexual harassment and assault, also faced criticism for its potential to devolve into a form of online shaming without addressing the systemic issues that perpetuate such behavior. The movement's long-term impact on workplace culture and legal frameworks remains a subject of ongoing debate. These examples underscore the need for a more nuanced understanding of online activism. While social media can be a powerful tool for raising awareness and mobilizing support, it's crucial to recognize its limitations. Sustainable change requires more than just online engagement. It demands sustained commitment, strategic planning, and a willingness to engage in uncomfortable conversations and actions beyond the digital realm. Social media platforms, while designed to connect individuals across geographical boundaries, can inadvertently create echo chambers where users are primarily exposed to information and opinions that confirm their existing beliefs. This phenomenon can exacerbate the pitfalls of performative activism by fostering a culture of moral superiority and groupthink. Within these echo chambers, dissenting voices are often silenced or drowned out, leading to a distorted perception of public opinion and a lack of critical engagement with complex issues. The pressure to conform to the prevailing narratives within these online communities can stifle meaningful dialogue and discourage individuals from expressing nuanced perspectives. Furthermore, the algorithms that govern social media platforms often prioritize content that generates high engagement, regardless of its accuracy or depth. This can create a feedback loop where sensationalized or emotionally charged content, including instances of performative activism, is amplified, while more nuanced or critical perspectives are relegated to the sidelines. This echo chamber effect can hinder the effectiveness of online activism by creating a false sense of consensus and limiting opportunities for constructive debate and collaboration. To ensure that social media activism translates into meaningful change, it's essential to break free from these echo chambers, engage with diverse perspectives, and prioritize critical thinking over blind conformity. In today's hyper-connected world, corporations are acutely aware of the importance of projecting a socially responsible image. Consumers are increasingly drawn to brands that align with their values, prompting companies to engage in what has become known as corporate virtue signaling. This involves publicly promoting ethical stances and social causes, often as part of their marketing and branding strategies. While some companies may genuinely strive to operate ethically and contribute to positive social change, corporate virtue signaling often prioritizes appearances over substantive action. This disconnect between words and deeds can be seen in various industries, from fashion to technology to food and beverage. One common example is the practice of greenwashing. where companies exaggerate their environmental sustainability efforts to appeal to eco-conscious consumers. This can involve making misleading claims about their product's environmental impact, or engaging in token gestures, such as using recycled packaging while overlooking more significant environmental concerns within their supply chains. Similarly, companies may tout their commitment to diversity and inclusion, showcasing diverse models in their advertising campaigns or publicly supporting social justice movements. However, these public displays of allyship may not always translate into meaningful changes in hiring practices, workplace culture, or support for policies that promote equity and inclusion. One of the most visible manifestations of corporate virtue signaling is the phenomenon of rainbow capitalism, particularly evident during Pride Month. Each June, companies across various industries adorn their logos, products, and marketing materials with rainbow colors, ostensibly to show their support for the LGBTQ+ community. While this display of solidarity can be seen as a positive step toward greater visibility and acceptance, it often draws criticism for being superficial and commercially driven. Critics argue that many companies engage in rainbow capitalism to capitalize on the purchasing power of the LGBTQ+ community without addressing the underlying issues of discrimination, inequality, and lack of representation that persist within their own organizations and society at large. For instance, companies may release limited edition Pride-themed products, donating a small portion of the proceeds to LGBTQ+ charities. However, their overall business practices may not reflect a genuine commitment to LGBTQ+ rights, such as providing equal benefits for same-sex partners, or implementing policies that protect LGBTQ+ employees from discrimination. This disconnect between symbolic gestures and concrete actions highlights the ethical complexities of corporate virtue signaling. While visibility and representation are important, they must be accompanied by tangible efforts to create a more just and equitable society for all. The rise of corporate virtue signaling has sparked a broader debate about the role of businesses in society and the ethical implications of their actions. Proponents of corporate social responsibility, CSR, argue that companies have a moral obligation to use their resources and influence to address social and environmental issues. They believe that businesses should strive to be a force for good, contributing to the well-being of their employees, communities, and the planet. However, critics of CSR argue that it can be used as a smokescreen for corporate self-interest. They contend that companies often engage in CSR initiatives to enhance their brand image, appease activist groups, or deflect criticism rather than out of genuine concern for social good. This skepticism highlights the need for greater transparency and accountability within the realm of corporate social responsibility. Furthermore, the increasing prevalence of corporate virtue signaling raises questions about the nature of authenticity in the business world. When companies are primarily concerned with projecting a certain image, it can erode trust and create a climate of cynicism among consumers. This underscores the importance of aligning corporate actions with stated values and prioritizing genuine social impact over superficial gestures. The ethical tightrope that companies must navigate in today's socially conscious marketplace is a precarious one. While consumers increasingly demand that businesses take a stand on social and environmental issues, they are also quick to call out hypocrisy and inauthenticity. This necessitates a move beyond mere virtue signaling toward a more meaningful and accountable approach to corporate social responsibility. Imagine a Stoic philosopher, draped in simple robes, observing the bustling marketplace of virtue signaling on social media. With a calm gaze and a measured demeanor, they would likely see through the carefully crafted facades and pronouncements of moral righteousness. To a Stoic, the true measure of virtue lies not in public displays, but in the inner workings of one's character. Stoicism, with its emphasis on living in accordance with nature and reason, places a high value on authenticity and the alignment of one's actions with one's inner values. Virtue, for a Stoic, is not a performance, but a way of life, cultivated through self-reflection, discipline, and a commitment to living in accordance with reason. From this perspective, virtue signaling, with its focus on external validation and social approval, would likely be seen as a distraction from the pursuit of genuine virtue. The Stoic would argue that true moral worth stems not from the opinions of others, but from the consistency and integrity of one's actions, regardless of whether anyone is watching or applauding. Instead of seeking to impress others with their moral pronouncements, the Stoic would advise individuals to focus on cultivating inner virtue through self-examination, honest reflection, and a commitment to acting in accordance with their values. The Stoic's message is clear. True virtue is its own reward, and its value lies not in its public display, but in its quiet, unwavering presence in one's life. Now shift your perspective to that of a utilitarian, ever focused on maximizing happiness and well-being for the greatest number of people. They might view the bustling landscape of virtue signaling with a more pragmatic eye, weighing the potential benefits against the potential harms. A utilitarian would argue that the morality of virtue signaling hinges on its consequences. If the act of publicly expressing one's values, even if motivated by self-interest, leads to a net increase in happiness, well-being, or social progress, then it could be deemed ethically justifiable. For instance, if a celebrity's social media post about a charitable cause inspires thousands of followers to donate money or volunteer their time, a utilitarian might argue that the positive outcomes outweigh the potentially self-serving motives behind the initial act. The ends, in this case, justify the means. However, a utilitarian would also be wary of the potential harms of virtue signaling, such as the spread of misinformation, the creation of a culture of moral superiority, and the diversion of resources away from more effective forms of activism. The ethical calculation, therefore, becomes more complex, requiring a careful assessment of both the short-term and long-term consequences of virtue signaling. The utilitarian's perspective highlights the need for a nuanced approach to evaluating the ethics of virtue signaling, one that considers not only the intentions behind the act, but also its potential to contribute to or detract from the greater good. Finally, step into the shoes of a deontologist, a staunch believer in the inherent rightness or wrongness of actions, regardless of their consequences. They would scrutinize virtue signaling through the lens of moral duty and the intention behind the act, rather than its potential outcomes. To a deontologist, the act of virtue signaling, particularly when driven by self-interest or a desire for social approval, would likely be deemed morally flawed. Deontology emphasizes the importance of acting in accordance with moral principles, such as honesty, integrity, and respect for others. Virtue signaling, with its focus on appearances and external validation, often runs counter to these principles. A deontologist would argue that true moral worth stems from the intention behind one's actions, not from the social rewards that may follow. If the primary motivation for expressing one's values is to enhance one's reputation or gain social approval, then the act itself is morally suspect, regardless of its potential positive consequences. From a deontological perspective, the focus should be on cultivating a genuine commitment to one's values and acting in accordance with those values consistently, regardless of whether anyone is watching or applauding. The realm of politics, with its constant jockeying for power and public approval, provides fertile ground for virtue signaling. Politicians, ever attuned to the shifting winds of public sentiment, often find themselves tempted to engage in symbolic gestures and pronouncements that align with prevailing moral narratives, regardless of their true convictions or legislative track records. The political arena thrives on the art of persuasion, and what better way to win over voters than by appealing to their sense of morality? Politicians, aware of this dynamic, often craft their messages and actions to portray themselves as champions of virtue, aligning themselves with popular causes and distancing themselves from perceived moral transgressions. This strategic deployment of morality can take various forms. Politicians might deliver impassioned speeches condemning social injustices, propose legislation with symbolic but largely toothless measures, or participate in highly publicized events designed to showcase their supposed commitment to certain values. However, the true test of a politician's commitment to a cause lies not in their words, but in their actions. Examining their voting records, policy proposals, and allocation of resources reveals the depth or lack thereof of their dedication to the values they so publicly espouse. The dissonance between rhetoric and reality often exposes the hollowness of virtue signaling in the political sphere. The media, often hailed as the Fourth Estate, plays a pivotal role in shaping public discourse and influencing perceptions of morality. However, in the age of virtue signaling, the lines between objective reporting and the amplification of performative displays of righteousness can become increasingly blurred. News outlets, vying for clicks and viewership in an increasingly competitive media landscape, often find themselves drawn to stories that evoke strong emotional responses. Virtue signaling, with its inherent appeal to our sense of right and wrong, provides ample fodder for attention-grabbing headlines and viral content. This can manifest in various ways. Media outlets might dedicate disproportionate coverage to stories involving public figures engaging in acts of virtue, often overlooking more nuanced or less sensationalized accounts of social good. They might also frame stories in a way that reinforces prevailing moral narratives, even when those narratives lack nuance or fail to capture the complexities of an issue. The media's role in amplifying virtue signaling can have both positive and negative consequences. On the one hand, it can raise awareness about important social issues and mobilize public support for worthy causes. On the other hand, it can contribute to a culture of outrage and moral grandstanding where superficial displays of righteousness take precedence over meaningful dialogue and action. In today's information-saturated world, the average citizen is bombarded with a constant stream of messages and images, many of which involve various forms of virtue signaling. This deluge of moral posturing can make it increasingly difficult to discern genuine acts of social good from calculated attempts to manipulate public perception. This constant exposure to virtue signaling can have a numbing effect, leading to skepticism, cynicism, and a general distrust of public figures, institutions, and even individuals who engage in such behavior. When everyone is seemingly competing for the moral high ground, it becomes challenging to identify those who are genuinely committed to the causes they champion. This climate of distrust can have detrimental consequences for social progress. When individuals lose faith in the authenticity of those in positions of power or influence, they may become disillusioned and disengaged from civic life, hindering collective efforts to address societal challenges. Moreover, the pervasiveness of virtue signaling can contribute to a culture of moral superiority, where individuals and groups compete for recognition and validation based on their perceived righteousness. This can lead to polarization, division, and a reluctance to engage in meaningful dialogue across ideological divides. Our journey through the labyrinth of virtue signaling has revealed a complex and often unsettling reality. In an age where our lives are increasingly lived online, the lines between genuine activism and performative displays of righteousness have become blurred, leaving us grappling with questions of authenticity, integrity, and the true meaning of moral action. We've witnessed the rise of performative activism, where social media has become a stage for showcasing our supposed moral superiority, often at the expense of meaningful engagement with the issues at hand. The ease with which we can like a post, share a hashtag, or don a symbolic ribbon has created an illusion of progress, lulling us into a false sense of accomplishment, while the root causes of social problems remain unaddressed. Corporate virtue signaling, with its calculated attempts to capitalize on our collective conscience, has further eroded our trust in institutions and those in positions of power. Companies eager to portray themselves as allies in the fight for social justice often resort to superficial gestures and marketing ploys that prioritize profits over genuine commitment to the causes they claim to support. This pervasive culture of moral posturing has left many feeling disillusioned, cynical and wary of any display of virtue, no matter how well-intentioned. The constant barrage of carefully curated images, pronouncements of solidarity, and hashtags proclaiming allegiance to various causes has created a climate of skepticism, where genuine acts of social good are often met with suspicion and distrust. In the face of this disheartening reality, it's tempting to succumb to cynicism and disengage from social activism altogether. However, such a response would only serve to further entrench the very dynamics that have given rise to virtue signaling in the first place. Instead, we must rise to the challenge of reclaiming authenticity in our social engagement, both online and offline. This begins with a conscious effort to shift our focus from appearances to action, from seeking validation to driving meaningful change. It requires us to look beyond the superficiality of likes, shares and hashtags and engage with the complexities of the issues at hand. It demands that we move beyond the comfort of our echo chambers and engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different perspectives. Reclaiming authenticity also involves holding ourselves and others accountable for the gap between our words and our actions. It means challenging performative displays of allyship and demanding that institutions, corporations and individuals alike back up their pronouncements of solidarity with concrete actions that promote equity, justice and sustainability. This is not to say that we should abandon social media or other online platforms as tools for social change. Rather, we must learn to navigate these spaces with a critical eye, discerning genuine activism from mere virtue signaling. We must use our voices to amplify the voices of those who are often marginalized or silenced, and we must prioritize engagement over empty gestures. As technology continues to evolve at an unprecedented pace, the landscape of social engagement will undoubtedly continue to shift and transform. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and other emerging technologies have the potential to both exacerbate and mitigate the challenges posed by virtue signaling. On the one hand, these technologies could be used to create even more sophisticated and insidious forms of virtue signaling, where algorithms are designed to manipulate our emotions, exploit our biases, and reinforce existing power structures. We've already witnessed how social media platforms can be weaponized to spread misinformation, sow discord, and undermine trust in democratic institutions. On the other hand, these same technologies have the potential to foster greater transparency, accountability, and authenticity in our social interactions. Imagine a world where AI-powered tools could help us identify and filter out fake news, expose instances of corporate greenwashing, and hold politicians accountable for their campaign promises. The future of social engagement hinges on our ability to harness the power of technology for good, to create online spaces that promote critical thinking, empathy, and a shared commitment to creating a more just and equitable world. This requires ongoing dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to adapt to the ever-changing digital landscape. Ultimately, the antidote to virtue signaling lies in cultivating a culture of integrity, both in our individual lives and in the institutions that shape our society. This requires a fundamental shift in values, from prioritizing appearances to embracing authenticity, from seeking validation to pursuing what is right, regardless of external recognition. It means fostering a sense of shared responsibility for the well-being of our communities and our planet, recognizing that true progress requires more than just symbolic gestures or empty pronouncements. It demands that we approach social issues with humility, recognizing the limitations of our own understanding and embracing the complexities of the challenges we face. Cultivating a culture of integrity also entails fostering a healthy skepticism towards those who claim the moral high ground, whether they be politicians, corporations, or individuals. It means looking beyond the carefully crafted images and pronouncements of virtue and demanding transparency, accountability, and a genuine commitment to action. In a world increasingly saturated with superficiality and moral posturing, the pursuit of integrity may seem like a daunting task. However, it is a task that we cannot afford to neglect. The future of our society, and indeed the future of our planet, may very well depend on our ability to move beyond the allure of virtue signaling and embrace the transformative power of genuine, ethical action.